The windshield wipers scraped against the frozen glass, their rhythm matching the dull ache in my chest as I drove past the Blackwood mansion on Christmas Eve. I wasn't planning to stop. Lord knows Kevin had made it clear that unannounced visits weren't welcome, but something caught my eye in the amber glow of their porch lights. A figure huddled against the massive oak door, small, shivering, my daughter. I pulled over so fast the tires skidded on the icy asphalt, my hands already trembling as I fumbled with the door handle. Jennifer sat curled against the cold stone steps, her thin cardigan no match for the December wind that cut through Cleveland like a blade. Her breath came in desperate puffs of white vapor, and in her lap, clutched like a lifeline, was a small wrapped package tied with the burgundy ribbon she'd spent an hour choosing at the craft store last week. The scarf. The one she'd knitted for Kevin's daughter, working on it every evening by lamplight until her fingers cramped, desperate to win over a teenager who barely acknowledged her existence. Behind those glowing windows, I could hear them. Laughter, the clink of wine glasses, the warmth of family I remembered from our own Christmases before her father died, before everything changed, before Kevin swept in with his charming smile and promises of healing. Jennifer? My voice cracked like thin ice. She looked up and I saw my beautiful girl, the one who used to command every classroom, who could silence a room full of rowdy eighth graders with just a raised eyebrow, reduced to something broken and apologetic. Her makeup had run in dark streaks down her cheeks. "I brought the wrong wine," she whispered, as if that explained everything. "He said I embarrassed him in front of his parents." 3 hours, Mom. I've been out here for 3 hours. My hands clenched into fists inside my coat pockets. 3 hours, while they celebrated inside like she didn't exist. But then Jennifer's voice dropped to barely audible, and her next words changed everything. "Mom, I found something in Kevin's study. Something that changes everything about why he really married me." The memory hit me like a slap as I helped Jennifer into my car that frozen Christmas Eve Kevin, standing in our kitchen doorway 2 years earlier, holding a bouquet of white roses so perfect they looked artificial. Just like him, I realized now, just like everything about him. "Mrs. Patterson," he'd said, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey, "I hope you don't mind me stealing Jennifer away for dinner." That smile. God, that smile could charm the angels, but something about the way his eyes stayed cold while his mouth moved made my coffee taste bitter on my tongue. I should have listened to that bitter taste. Jennifer had glowed that day, her cheeks flushed pink as she fumbled with her earrings, the small pearl ones her father had given her for her college graduation. She'd been so broken after her divorce from that monster Tyler, so desperate to believe in love again that she mistook Kevin's attention for affection. I watched him straighten her collar with the precise movements of someone arranging a display, and my chest tightened with something I couldn't name yet. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he murmured, but his fingers lingered on her throat just a moment too long. Possessive, marking territory. The gifts came fast after that. Designer handbags she was afraid to use because they cost more than her monthly salary. Diamond earrings that made her take off her father's pearls. A new car, silver and sleek, and nothing like the cheerful yellow Volkswagen she'd driven since college. The one with the daisy stickers she'd bought on a whim during a girls' trip to California. "The Volkswagen isn't safe anymore," Kevin had explained, his hand resting on the small of Jennifer's back as they stood in our driveway. "I worry about you driving that old thing. This is better, reliable. But I miss the daisy stickers. I miss the way Jennifer used to laugh when she honked that ridiculous horn that played La Cucaracha. The new car was silent, expensive, empty. The isolation started slowly, like a noose tightening by degrees. Jennifer's book club met every Thursday, had for 6 years, ever since her divorce. These women had held her while she cried, celebrated when she got her teaching job, thrown her a surprise party when she turned 33. But suddenly, Kevin needed her for family dinners on Thursdays. His sister was in town. His mother was hosting. His cousin was visiting. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Jennifer would whisper into the phone, her voice growing smaller each week. "Kevin says family comes first now that we're serious. You understand, right? I understood too well. Richard had never made me choose between him and my friends. Real love expanded your world. It didn't shrink it. The wedding was a masterpiece of subtle cruelty. The Blackwood family had money, old money that whispered instead of shouted. Money that made you feel poor just by existing in the same room. Kevin's mother, Patricia, wore pearls the size of grapes and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. She air-kissed Jennifer's cheek like she was greeting the hired help. "How lovely," Patricia murmured when Jennifer showed off her vintage wedding dress, her grandmother's lace altered to fit her perfectly. So rustic. I watched Jennifer's face crumble just slightly, watched her tug at the sleeves she'd been so proud of that morning. Kevin appeared at her elbow instantly, his hand finding that same spot on the small of her back. "Mother's just traditional," he said, his voice pitched low enough that only Jennifer and I could hear. "She'll warm up to you. Give it time." But I caught the look that passed between mother and son. Understanding. Conspiracy. The reception was worse. Jennifer sat at the head table like a beautiful ornament, smiling dutifully while Kevin's family told stories that never included her, shared memories that dated back generations she'd never be part of. When she tried to add something, anything, to the conversation, they'd pause just long enough to make her feel foolish before continuing as if she hadn't spoken. I excused myself to use the restroom, my hands shaking with suppressed fury, when I heard Patricia's voice drifting from the family alcove near the bar. She was speaking to Kevin's aunt, her voice carrying the casual confidence of someone who'd never been challenged. "She's pretty enough, I suppose. And Kevin needs a wife for appearances. The promotion requires it. But she'll do until he gets what he needs from her father's estate." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Estate. What estate? Jennifer's father had been a high school principal. We weren't rich. But then I remembered the life insurance policy, the one that matured when Jennifer turned 35. $400,000 that had seemed like such a blessing when Richard set it up, wanting to make sure our daughter was taken care of if something happened to him. Something had happened to him. Heart attack at 58, sudden and brutal, but he'd never imagined this. I stood frozen in that marble hallway, crystal chandeliers casting shadows that suddenly looked like spider webs, and realized I was watching my daughter marry a predator. The white roses in her bouquet, the same artificial perfect flowers Kevin had brought that first day, seemed to mock me from across the room. The worst part was Jennifer's face when she caught my eye from the head table. She was trying so hard to look happy, but I could see the confusion there, the desperate hope that she was finally part of something special. She didn't know yet that she wasn't the bride. She was the mark. The pieces fell into place 3 weeks after the wedding, sitting at my kitchen table with Jennifer's birth certificate spread before me like evidence in a crime I was just beginning to understand. March 15th. Her 35th birthday was 6 months away, the same day Richard's life insurance policy would mature and release $400,000 into her name. 400,000 reasons for Kevin to marry my daughter. I traced the faded ink on the birth certificate with my fingertip, remembering the day Richard had set up that policy. Jennifer was only 3 then, gap-toothed and pigtailed, playing with her wooden blocks on this same kitchen floor while her father filled out forms at the insurance office. "It's for her future, Helen," he'd said, his hand warm on my shoulder. "College, maybe a house down payment, something to give her a good start." He'd never imagined it would make her a target. The phone calls had started getting shorter after the honeymoon. Jennifer's voice, once bright and chattery, became clipped and distant. When I asked about her job at Riverside Elementary, she'd change the subject. When I mentioned her friend Katie's baby shower, she'd grow quiet. "Kevin thinks I shouldn't attend," she finally admitted one Tuesday afternoon, her words careful and rehearsed. "He says it's better if we focus on building our own family traditions." You know, instead of clinging to the past, as if 20 years of friendship was something dirty to be discarded. The real blow came in November, just before Thanksgiving. I'd driven over to their new house. Kevin had insisted they move to Westchester, 40 minutes away from our neighborhood where Jennifer had roots, with a box of Christmas decorations. The same ornaments Jennifer and I had made together every year since she was 5. Construction paper angels with her school photos glued in the center. Popsicle stick reindeer, the wonky clay star she'd sculpted in 2nd grade that we'd painted gold despite its lopsided points. Kevin answered the door in his expensive cashmere sweater, his smile polite but cold as winter wind. "Helen? What a surprise." He didn't invite me in. "Jennifer's resting. The move has been exhausting for her." Through the doorway, I could see their living room, all stark white furniture and crystal vases, looking like a magazine spread instead of a home. No family photos, no warm touches, nothing that said Jennifer lived there at all. "I brought the Christmas ornaments," I said, holding up the cardboard box that had traveled with Jennifer through 3 apartments and 2 relationships. "I thought you might want to put them up early this year." Something flickered across Kevin's face. Disgust, maybe, or calculation. "Actually, Helen, we've decided to start fresh with decorations this year. Jennifer's taste is evolving now that she's part of the Blackwood family. Those handmade things are a bit rustic for our aesthetic." My hands tightened on the box. Inside were 27 years of Christmas mornings, of Jennifer's artwork, of memories Kevin was dismissing like garage sale rejects. "Where is Jennifer?" I asked. "I'd like to talk to her about this." "She agrees with me completely. In fact, she asked me to handle this conversation because she knew it might hurt your feelings." His voice was gentle, sympathetic, the tone you'd use with a confused elderly woman who couldn't understand that times had changed. "She's growing as a person, Helen. Try to be happy for her." He closed the door before I could respond, leaving me standing on their pristine porch with a box full of our history in my arms. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of Jennifer sitting on their white couch, staring at nothing, her hands folded in her lap like a child in time out. She looked up and saw me. For just a moment, her face cracked open, revealing the lost little girl underneath. She started to rise, but Kevin appeared behind her, his hand settling on her shoulder with what looked like comfort, but felt like a chain. She sank back down, her eyes dropping to her hands. I drove home with those ornaments and cried over every single one. The clay star, the paper angels, the popsicle stick. Reindeer Jennifer had been so proud of in 3rd grade. That night, I called my neighbor's son, Tommy, the one who worked as a paralegal downtown, and asked him a hypothetical question about inheritance laws. "If someone gets married and then receives a large inheritance," I said carefully, "what happens to that money in a divorce?" Tommy's pause told me everything I needed to know. "In Ohio? If it's received during the marriage, it's considered marital property in most cases. The spouse could claim half, maybe more, if they can prove they contributed to preserving or increasing its value." My blood turned to slush in my veins. Kevin wasn't just isolating Jennifer from her past. He was positioning himself to steal her future. I started paying attention then, really paying attention. The way Kevin answered Jennifer's phone when I called, always with some excuse about why she couldn't talk. The way he scheduled family commitments every time I suggested a mother-daughter lunch. The way Jennifer's voice grew smaller each week, more apologetic, more careful. The final confirmation came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in December. My phone rang, jarring me from sleep with that particular terror reserved for middle-of-the-night calls. Jennifer's name glowed on the screen. "Mom?" Her voice was thick with tears, muffled like she was hiding in a closet or bathroom. "I'm sorry to call so late. I needed to hear your voice." "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Are you hurt? Do you need me to come over?" "No!" The word exploded from her like a gunshot, then quieter, more broken. "No, please don't come." Kevin says, if you keep interfering in our marriage, it proves you don't respect our relationship. He says family interference is the #1 cause of divorce, and he doesn't want us to become another statistic. I gripped the phone so hard I thought it might shatter. "Jennifer, listen to me." I have to go. He's coming upstairs. I love you, Mom, but please, please just trust that I know what I'm doing. The line went dead. I stared at the phone screen until it faded to black, seeing my own reflection ghosted in the darkness. In that reflection, I saw something I hadn't felt in years. Pure maternal rage, the kind that could move mountains or destroy them. I'd been too polite, too respectful of my daughter's choices. But Kevin had made one critical mistake in his calculation. He'd forgotten that Jennifer wasn't just inheriting money in 6 months. She was inheriting a mother's love. And that was something he'd never be able to steal, no matter how many lawyers he hired or how many lies he told. The ornaments sat in their box by my front door, waiting. But now they weren't just memories. They were evidence. And come March 15th, they'd be weapons. The crystal glasses caught the afternoon light streaming through the Blackwood family's dining room windows, casting rainbows across the mahogany table that probably cost more than most people's cars. I sat in the chair Kevin had assigned me, not beside Jennifer, but at the far end of the table like an afterthought, watching my daughter serve his family their Sunday dinner with the careful precision of hired help. This wasn't how Sunday dinners were supposed to work. I remembered our own Sunday gatherings when Richard was alive, when Jennifer would burst through our kitchen door at noon with flour in her hair from attempting some new recipe, laughing at her own disasters, filling our modest house with warmth and chaos and love. We'd eat off mismatched plates at our scarred oak table, talking over each other, Jennifer stealing rolls from my plate while Richard pretended not to notice. Here, everything was performance. Everything was judgment. Jennifer, darling. Patricia Blackwood's voice sliced through the air like a silver knife, sweet on the surface but sharp enough to draw blood. The roast is a touch overdone. Kevin prefers it medium rare, not medium well. Perhaps you should set a timer next time? Jennifer's face flushed crimson as she set down the serving platter. I'm so sorry. I thought I remembered correctly, but it's fine. Kevin interrupted, his tone the particular shade of patience reserved for disappointing children. Mother's just trying to help you improve. We all want what's best for you. The way he said we excluded Jennifer completely. She was the project, not part of the family. Of course, Jennifer whispered, her voice growing smaller by the minute. Thank you for teaching me. I watched her hands shake as she cut into her own portion, the smallest piece, naturally, and my chest burned with the effort of staying silent. This was the same woman who had once told me with fierce pride that she'd perfected her grandmother's recipe for Christmas cookies after 15 attempts. Now she was apologizing for existing. Kevin's daughter, Chloe, 16 and sharp-tongued like her grandmother, rolled her eyes with the casual cruelty that only teenagers can perfect. God, Jennifer, you're trying so hard it's actually painful to watch. Like, we get it. You want to be part of our family, but you can't just fake your way into belonging. The words hit Jennifer like physical blows. She set down her fork, her appetite clearly gone, and attempted a smile that looked more like a wound. I'm sorry if I seem... You apologize too much, Chloe continued, examining her manicured nails with bored disdain. It's super weird. Like, we're not going to bite you or whatever. But they were biting her. Death by 1,000 tiny cuts. Kevin's father, William, cleared his throat and launched into a story about their family's country club, speaking as if Jennifer wasn't sitting right there. The conversation flowed around her like water around a stone, deliberate exclusion disguised as natural discourse. They discussed people she'd never met, places she'd never been, memories she could never share. When Jennifer tried to contribute, mentioning a similar story about her own father's golf games, the table fell into that particular silence reserved for social missteps. Patricia smiled that razor smile. "How quaint," she said, and somehow made the word sound like an insult. The coup de grace came with dessert. Patricia disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a magnificent apple pie, golden-crusted and fragrant with cinnamon, the kind that would have made my grandmother weep with envy. She cut generous slices for William, for Kevin, for Chloe, for me. When she reached Jennifer, she paused, tilting her head with manufactured concern. "Oh, I'm so sorry, dear. I'm afraid there isn't enough for everyone." I miscalculated. She gestured helplessly at the pie, which still had a quarter remaining, sitting there like an accusation. Perhaps next time I should make two. Jennifer's face crumpled for just a moment, a flash of pure hurt that she quickly buried under another apologetic smile. "That's perfectly fine. I'm actually quite full from dinner." But I could see her staring at that untouched quarter of pie. Could see the way her fingers twisted her wedding ring like a prayer. This wasn't about pie. This was about power, about making Jennifer understand that even in her own husband's house, she would always be the outsider, begging for scraps. The table felt like it was shrinking around me, the air growing thick with malice disguised as manners. I watched my confident, capable daughter, the one who had once managed 30 rowdy 8th graders and made them love Shakespeare reduced to this trembling, apologetic shadow of herself. "Excuse me," Jennifer whispered, standing so quickly her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "I just need to... I'll be right back." She fled toward the powder room, and I heard the soft click of the lock, followed by something that sounded suspiciously like muffled sobbing. My hands clenched around my coffee cup until I felt the delicate handle crack under the pressure. That's when I heard it. William and Kevin speaking in low voices they thought I couldn't catch over the sound of Chloe scrolling through her phone. "The timeline looks good," William was saying, his voice businesslike and cold. "March 15th, she gets the full amount. If Kevin files within the first year of marriage, he can claim temporary spousal support during proceedings. Smart move, waiting for the inheritance to mature first." "The documentation is solid," Kevin replied, cutting another bite of the pie Jennifer wasn't allowed to have. "Dr. Reynolds has been tracking her emotional instability since October. The isolation, the mood swings, the dependency issues, it all builds a case." Dr. Reynolds, Jennifer's therapist. The one Kevin had insisted she see to help her adjust to married life. They weren't just stealing her money, they were stealing her sanity, building a legal case to paint her as unfit, unstable, incapable of handling her own inheritance. "How long until—" William began, but stopped abruptly as Patricia appeared beside my chair, like a shark sensing blood in the water. "Helen," she said, her voice honey over broken glass, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" She guided me into the kitchen, closing the door behind us with deliberate care. The room was spotless, magazine perfect, nothing like the warm chaos of my own kitchen where Jennifer had learned to cook at my elbow. Patricia moved to the window, her back straight as a blade, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "I'm concerned about Jennifer," she said, not bothering to turn around. "Her behavior has become quite erratic lately. The crying spells, the paranoia about not fitting in, the constant need for reassurance. Kevin is trying to be patient, but it's putting a strain on their marriage." She finally turned, and her smile was pure predator. "We've been documenting her episodes, you understand, for Kevin's protection, just in case things continue to deteriorate." The words hit me like a physical blow. Episodes, deterioration, protection. "What are you saying?" I managed, though my throat felt lined with sandpaper. "I'm saying that if your daughter continues down this path, she's going to destroy the best thing that ever happened to her. Kevin deserves better than a wife who can't handle the pressures of our social circle. Someone needs to help Jennifer understand that." She moved closer, and I caught the scent of her expensive perfume, cold and floral, like flowers at a funeral. "Someone," she continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "needs to stop interfering in their marriage before irreparable damage is done." Through the kitchen window, I could see my own car in their circular driveway, looking small and shabby against the backdrop of their manicured landscaping. For a moment, I felt as tiny and powerless as they wanted me to feel. But then I heard it. The soft sound of the powder room door opening, followed by Jennifer's footsteps as she returned to the dining room. My daughter, my baby girl. The strong, brilliant woman they were systematically destroying. Patricia was still watching me, waiting for submission, for acknowledgement that I understood my place in their hierarchy of power. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and met her gaze with steel of my own. "I think," I said quietly, "you've made a terrible mistake." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched in question. "You've forgotten," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word, "that Jennifer isn't just Kevin's wife. She's my daughter, and some things, some people are worth fighting for." Patricia's smile faltered for just a moment, and in that crack, I saw something that gave me hope. Fear. The heater in my Honda wheezed like an old man's lungs as Jennifer huddled against the passenger seat, her wedding ring catching the streetlight through the frosted window. She hadn't spoken since we'd driven away from the Blackwood mansion, leaving behind the golden warmth and cruel laughter that had excluded her for 3 frozen hours on Christmas Eve. Now, parked outside the all-night diner on Route 42, she finally broke. "I found the files, Mom." Her voice was barely above a whisper, raw from crying. Hidden in Kevin's study in a locked drawer behind his law books. I only found them because I was looking for aspirin and saw the key taped under his desk. She pulled a manila folder from inside her coat, thin but heavy with the weight of betrayal. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing neat stacks of documents, photographs, and printed emails that made my blood run cold in the December air. "Private investigators," she continued, her finger tracing over letterhead that read, "Meridian Surveillance Solutions. They've been following me for 8 months, Mom." 8 months. Taking pictures of me crying in grocery store parking lots, documenting every time I called in sick to work, recording when I had lunch alone because I don't have friends anymore. The top photograph showed Jennifer sitting on a park bench, her shoulders curved inward like broken wings, staring at her phone with an expression of such profound loneliness that my chest felt carved hollow. I remembered that day she'd texted me about meeting for coffee, then canceled an hour later because Kevin had surprised her with tickets to some charity function. Another photo, Jennifer coming out of Dr. Reynolds' office, her face blotchy from tears. Another, Jennifer at the pharmacy, picking up what looked like anti-anxiety medication. "They documented everything," she whispered. "Every therapy session, every prescription, every moment when I looked unstable or dependent or broken." I lifted one of the surveillance reports, my reading glasses catching the overhead light. The language was clinical, detached, describing my daughter like a specimen under a microscope. Subject exhibits signs of increasing emotional volatility, frequent crying episodes, social withdrawal consistent with depressive behaviors, appears heavily dependent on spouse for emotional regulation. Each line was a knife twist. Each observation was her humanity stripped away, cataloged, weaponized. "But that's not the worst part," Jennifer said, her voice cracking like ice under pressure. She pulled out a different folder, this one stuffed with transcripts. "He's been recording me, Mom. Our private conversations, our arguments, our most intimate moments, all of it." My hands trembled as I read the transcript dated 3 months ago. It looked like a court document, formatted with timestamps and speaker identifications. But I recognized the conversation. I'd been there for the aftermath when Jennifer had called me, sobbing about a fight over her wanting to visit her college roommate. On paper, it looked damning. Jennifer's words were transcribed with every stutter, every emotional outburst, every moment when grief or frustration had made her voice climb higher. But Kevin's responses were edited smooth, his tone described as calm and reassuring, while hers was labeled increasingly agitated and irrational. "This isn't how it happened," I said, remembering Jennifer's version of the same fight. She told me how Kevin had systematically dismissed her feelings, how he'd used that particular tone of voice, the one that made you feel crazy for having emotions at all. "I know, but look how it reads." She pointed to a section where the transcript made it seem like she'd thrown something at him. "I never threw anything. I set down a coffee mug too hard because I was upset, and it made a sound. But here it says I violently slammed objects while screaming incoherently about imagined slights." The methodical cruelty of it took my breath away. This wasn't just gaslighting. This was gaslighting with documentation, creating a paper trail that would make Jennifer look unstable, while Kevin appeared to be the long-suffering husband trying to help his mentally ill wife. "Dr. Reynolds," I said, remembering the name from William's conversation at dinner. "Your therapist. He's part of this?" Jennifer's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Kevin recommended him. Said I needed professional help to adjust to marriage, to deal with my trust issues from my first marriage. I thought he was trying to help me heal." She pulled out another document emails between Kevin and Dr. Reynolds discussing Jennifer's treatment plan. The therapist was providing regular updates on her mental state, her vulnerabilities, her fears. Everything she'd shared in confidence, believing she was safe, was being funneled directly to her husband. "They've been building a case for over a year," Jennifer whispered, "planning to have me declared mentally incompetent to handle my inheritance. Kevin would become my financial guardian, controlling everything my father left me." The papers scattered across my lap like evidence of a crime, which I realized they were. Fraud. Conspiracy. Emotional abuse so systematic it took my breath away. But Jennifer wasn't done. She reached deeper into her coat and pulled out a phone, not her usual iPhone, but an older model I didn't recognize. "This is Kevin's old phone. He forgot he'd given me the passcode months ago when his new one was being repaired. I found it in his desk drawer with these." She showed me a stack of printed text messages, and the name at the top made my stomach lurch. Allison Chen, Kevin's assistant. The messages went back 14 months before Jennifer and Kevin were even engaged. Screenshots of intimate conversations, photos I couldn't bear to look at, planning sessions that revealed the entire marriage was a con. "We need to move faster on the timeline," read one message from Allison to Kevin. "Jennifer's getting suspicious about the therapy sessions. Maybe we should trigger a bigger episode, something Dr. Reynolds can use in court." Kevin's response, already in motion. "I've been gradually increasing the isolation tactics. She's more fragile than I expected. This might be easier than we thought." Another exchange, dated just 6 weeks ago. "The house in Turks and Caicos is perfect. We can disappear there once the inheritance comes through and the divorce is finalized. She'll be so medicated and confused, she won't even fight the settlement." I felt like I was drowning in paper, in evidence of a betrayal so complete it redefined the word. These weren't the messages of a man having an affair. These were the communications of two predators discussing their prey. "Jennifer," I said, my voice hoarse with shock and rage, "how long have you known about this?" "I found the first batch 3 days ago. I've been going through everything since then, trying to understand, trying to figure out how I could have been so stupid." "You're not stupid." The words came out fiercer than I'd intended. "You're not the criminal here. You're the victim of something so calculated, so—" "Mom." Jennifer's voice cut through my anger like a blade. She was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen since she was 8 years old and had accidentally broken my mother's china vase, terrified, guilty, desperate for forgiveness. "There's something else. Something that changes everything." She pressed her hands against her stomach, and in that gesture I understood before she spoke. "I'm pregnant." The words hit the car like a physical force. Pregnant. A baby. My grandchild. "How long?" I whispered. 6 weeks. I found out 2 days after I discovered the files. I haven't told Kevin yet because—" Her voice broke completely. "Because I think he's going to try to take the baby too. Use it against me. Prove I'm an unfit mother who can't handle the stress of parenthood." She pulled out one more document, a legal brief Kevin's attorney had prepared, outlining potential custody arguments in case Jennifer became pregnant during the marriage. The language was cold, clinical, but the intent was clear. Paint Jennifer as mentally unstable, use her emotional responses to pregnancy hormones as evidence of her unfitness, gain full custody of any children born during the marriage. "He's planned for everything," Jennifer whispered. Every possible scenario, every way I might react or fight back, he's 3 steps ahead of me, and now there's a baby involved, and I don't know how to protect us both. I stared at my daughter, my brilliant, strong, broken daughter, and felt something shift inside my chest, something that had been building since I'd first seen those artificial roses, since Patricia's threats in the kitchen, since I'd watched Jennifer diminish herself piece by piece to fit into their cruel world. Maternal rage, pure and focused and absolutely lethal. "Jennifer," I said, gathering the scattered papers with hands that no longer trembled. "You're not 3 steps behind anymore. You're not fighting this alone." And most importantly, I met her eyes in the dashboard light, letting her see every ounce of steel in my spine. "You're not the one who should be afraid." Through the diner window, I could see a waitress pouring coffee for the late-night crowd, normal people living normal lives while we sat in my Honda holding evidence of a conspiracy that would have made film noir writers weep with envy. But as I looked at those surveillance photos, those transcripts, those calculated messages planning my daughter's destruction, I felt something else. Gratitude. Kevin and his family had been so arrogant, so certain of their superiority, that they'd documented everything. They'd just handed us the keys to their own destruction. "We're going to stop them," I said, surprising myself with the calm certainty in my voice. "All of them. And we're going to do it with their own evidence." Jennifer's eyes filled with something I hadn't seen there in months. Hope. But underneath that hope, I could see her still fragile fear, the way her hand kept moving protectively to her stomach where my grandchild was growing. She was carrying more than a baby now. She was carrying the weight of knowing that the man she'd married, the man she'd trusted with her heart and body, had been planning to steal everything from her, including the child they'd created together. In the distance, Christmas lights twinkled on houses where families were probably gathering around trees, sharing gifts and love, and the kind of warmth that had nothing to do with money or manipulation. Soon, I promised silently, Jennifer and her baby would have that kind of Christmas again. But first, we had some predators to destroy. The law offices of Rodriguez and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house on Elm Street, far removed from the glass towers where Kevin and his family conducted their polite destruction. I climbed those narrow stairs behind Jennifer 2 days after Christmas, my purse heavy with copies of every document we'd found, feeling like I was smuggling secrets through enemy territory, which I suppose I was. Jennifer moved like a woman walking to her own execution, each step careful and hesitant. She kept touching her stomach, a gesture so subtle I doubt she realized she was doing it, protecting the life growing there from the ugliness we were about to discuss. The manila folder in her arms contained enough evidence to destroy lives, but she carried it like it might explode at any moment. "Mom," she whispered as we reached the landing, "what if she doesn't believe us? What if she thinks I'm just another hysterical wife making accusations?" I remembered that feeling, the way Kevin and his family had made Jennifer doubt her own perceptions, question her own reality, until she couldn't trust even her clearest memories. That was the most insidious part of their cruelty. They'd convinced her that her pain wasn't real, that her instincts couldn't be trusted. "Then we find another lawyer," I said, though my chest tightened with fear that she might be right. "And another one after that, until someone listens." Diane Rodriguez opened her office door herself, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that looked like they'd seen enough human cruelty to fill several lifetimes. She wore a simple navy suit and sensible shoes, but there was something about the way she carried herself that made me think of steel wrapped in velvet. "Mrs. Patterson? Jennifer?" Her voice was warm but professional, with just a hint of a Spanish accent that softened the consonants. "Please come in. I've cleared my afternoon." The office felt like a sanctuary after the cold perfection of the Blackwood mansion. Books lined every wall. Family photos sat on the desk beside legal briefs, and a small electric kettle hummed quietly in the corner. It was a place where real people worked on real problems, not a stage set for performing wealth and superiority. "Jennifer," Diane said gently as we settled into worn leather chairs, "tell me what's been happening." And Jennifer did, halting at first, then with growing strength as Diane nodded and took notes without judgment. She described the isolation, the surveillance, the recorded conversations, the conspiracy with her therapist. When she showed Diane the text messages between Kevin and his assistant, the lawyer's eyebrows rose just slightly, the only sign of surprise she allowed herself. "This is extensive," Diane said, spreading the documents across her desk like pieces of a puzzle. "And incredibly well documented. In a way, their arrogance worked in your favor. Most people committing this kind of fraud are more careful about leaving evidence." "Is it fraud?" Jennifer asked, and I heard that familiar note of self-doubt creeping back into her voice. "I mean, legally? Or am I just reading too much into things?" Diane's expression hardened, and for a moment I saw the steel beneath the velvet. "Jennifer, what you've described is criminal conspiracy, financial fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and potentially elder abuse, since your inheritance comes from your deceased father. This isn't marriage problems. This is organized crime." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Jennifer's hands trembled as she reached for the paper cup of tea Diane had given her, and I watched my daughter struggle to accept that she hadn't imagined the horror of her situation. "But that's not the worst part," Diane continued, her voice gentle but relentless. "I need to show you something that might be difficult to hear, but it's important you understand the full scope of what you're dealing with." She turned to her computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "When you first called, I did some preliminary research on Kevin Blackwood and his family. What I found." She paused, looking directly at Jennifer. "You're not his first victim." The screen filled with legal documents, court records, newspaper clippings. Diane clicked through them methodically, building a case not just against Kevin, but against an entire family of predators. Stephanie Morrison married Kevin in 2018, divorced 6 months later, claiming emotional abuse and financial manipulation. She lost custody of her 2 children from a previous marriage after Kevin's legal team convinced the court she was mentally unstable. Jennifer's teacup rattled against its saucer. Children? She fought for 3 years to get them back, spent her entire inheritance ironically, also from a deceased parent on legal fees. Last I heard, she was working as a waitress in Oregon trying to rebuild her life. Diane clicked to the next file. Before Stephanie, there was Amanda Scott. Married Kevin's cousin William in 2015. Similar pattern isolation, gaslighting, surveillance. She lost her house, her savings, and her sanity before she managed to escape, still paying off the debt from their divorce proceedings. Another click, another victim. Rachel Torres married Kevin's brother James in 2020. 3 months after the wedding, she suffered what the family claimed was a complete emotional breakdown. She was hospitalized, medicated heavily, and by the time she recovered enough to fight back, James had cleaned out their joint accounts and disappeared to the Cayman Islands. The pattern was clear, methodical, horrifying. The Blackwood family wasn't just wealthy, they were predators with a system, a template they followed to identify, isolate, and destroy vulnerable women for their assets. "How many?" Jennifer whispered. "That I can document?" 7 women over the past 15 years. But I suspect there were more cases that were settled quietly, records that were sealed, women who were too broken or scared to fight back. Diane's voice carried the weight of professional rage, the fury of someone who dedicated her career to fighting exactly this kind of systematic abuse. Jennifer set down her teacup with such careful precision that I knew she was fighting not to throw it across the room. 7 women, 7 lives destroyed, and I was just next in line. "You were selected," Diane corrected firmly. "This wasn't random, Jennifer. They researched you, learned about your divorce, your father's death, your inheritance. They knew you were vulnerable and had assets worth targeting. Kevin didn't fall in love with you, he hunted you." The words were brutal, but necessary. I watched Jennifer's face as the final illusions about her marriage crumbled, replaced by something harder and cleaner: understanding. She was not the fool who'd fallen for a con. She was the prey who'd escaped the trap. "What happens now?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would be complicated and dangerous. Diane gathered the documents into neat piles, her movements brisk and purposeful. "Now we build a case." "But Jennifer, I need you to understand something crucial. Your birthday is in 3 weeks. Once that inheritance comes through, Kevin will move fast. The patterns from his previous victims suggest he'll either force a psychiatric hold or file for divorce immediately, claiming you're mentally unfit to handle your own finances." She pulled out a calendar and marked Jennifer's birthday with a red pen, March 15th. The date looked like a target. 3 weeks, she continued, to gather additional evidence, document his current behavior, and prepare our counterattack. Because make no mistake, once we move against him, this becomes war. Jennifer's hand moved to her stomach again, that protective gesture that was becoming habitual. "What about the baby? If this goes to court, if there's a custody fight, we'll protect both of you," Diane said with quiet certainty. "But Jennifer, I need you to do something incredibly difficult. I need you to go back to that house and act like nothing has changed. Let Kevin think his plan is working while we build the case that will destroy him." The color drained from Jennifer's face. "I don't know if I can do that. Now that I know what he is, how he's been manipulating me, I don't know if I can pretend." I reached across the space between our chairs and took my daughter's hand. Her fingers were ice cold despite the warmth of Diane's office, and I could feel the fine tremor of fear running through her like electricity. "You're stronger than you know," I said, echoing words Richard used to tell her when she was small and afraid of the dark. "You survived Tyler's physical abuse. You survived losing your father. You survived 2 years with Kevin without breaking, even when he tried his hardest to break you." "But this is different," she whispered. "This is pretending to love someone who's been planning to destroy me from the moment we met. This is sharing a bed with someone who sees me as nothing more than a bank account with legs." Diane leaned forward, her voice taking on the tone of someone who'd guided other women through this particular hell. "Jennifer, I won't lie to you. The next 3 weeks will be the hardest of your life. But remember this. Every day you stay in that house, every conversation you have with Kevin, every moment you spend playing the part of his devoted wife is time we're using to build the case that will not only protect you and your child, but potentially save other women from becoming his victims." She gestured to the files spread across her desk. 7 women's lives reduced to legal documents and newspaper clippings. You have something they didn't have. You have evidence. You have time. And most importantly, she looked at me, acknowledging the partnership we'd already formed. You have someone fighting with you, not just for you. Jennifer squeezed my hand, and I felt some of her strength returning. "What do we do first?" Diane's smile was sharp as a blade. "First, we make copies of everything and store them somewhere Kevin can never find them. Then we start documenting every interaction you have with him, every conversation, every manipulation attempt. We turn his own tactics against him." She stood and moved to a wall, safe hidden behind a law book, pulling out a small device that looked like a pen. Audio recorder. Voice activated, nearly undetectable. Everything he says to you from now on goes on the record. Jennifer took the device with hands that no longer shook. And then we wait for him to make a mistake. Because men like Kevin always do eventually. Their arrogance is their weakness. They can't resist the urge to gloat, to explain how clever they've been. And when he does... Diane's eyes glittered with predatory satisfaction. "We'll be ready." As we prepared to leave, Diane caught my arm. "Mrs. Patterson, I need you to understand something. The next 3 weeks won't just be hard on Jennifer. They'll be torture for you, watching your daughter live with someone you know is planning to destroy her. But your role is crucial. You're her anchor to reality when Kevin tries to make her doubt herself again. I nodded, feeling the weight of that responsibility settle on my shoulders like a cloak. Whatever it takes. One more thing, Diane said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Kevin's birthday is in 2 weeks. Traditionally, that's when the Blackwood family celebrates their successes. Based on the previous cases, I suspect they're planning something special for this year. She didn't need to spell it out. A party, a celebration, with Jennifer as the guest of honor at her own destruction. We'll be ready, I said, and meant it. As we walked back to my car, Jennifer was quiet, processing everything we'd learned. But when she spoke, her voice carried a new note. Not the broken apology I'd grown used to, but something harder and more determined. Mom, do you think I can really do this? Pretend for 3 more weeks? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. Beneath the fear and exhaustion, I could see traces of the woman she'd been before Kevin. The teacher who'd stood up to bullying parents, the fighter who'd left an abusive marriage, the survivor who'd rebuilt her life from nothing. Jennifer, I said, you've been pretending to be weak for 2 years to survive. Now it's time to pretend to be weak for 3 weeks to win. She smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from her in months. But as we drove away from Diane's office, I caught her checking the rearview mirror obsessively, her paranoia a reminder of how thoroughly Kevin had infiltrated even her sense of safety. 3 weeks, 21 days to play the most dangerous game of her life, with her future, her child's future, and potentially the futures of other women hanging in the balance. The clock was ticking, and somewhere across town, Kevin was probably planning her destruction, oblivious to the fact that his victim had just become his hunter. The mirror in my guest bathroom had witnessed 1,000 small vanities lipstick touched up before dinner parties, reading glasses adjusted for better light, the careful application of concealer over age spots that Richard used to say made me look distinguished, but it had never reflected anything as broken as my daughter's face that evening, 3 days after our meeting with Diane Rodriguez. Jennifer sat on the closed toilet seat, her shoulders curved inward like parentheses around an empty space where her confidence used to live. Her hands shook as she tried to apply mascara, the wand trembling so badly that black smudges appeared under her eyes like bruises. "I can't do this, Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of my old house settling around us. "I can't go back there and pretend everything is normal. I can't smile at him and cook his dinner and sleep in the same bed, knowing what I know." I watched her in the mirror, seeing past the hollow cheeks and dark circles to the ghost of the woman she'd been before Kevin. The teacher who'd stood up to school board bullies demanding she dumb down her curriculum. The fighter who'd left Tyler when his drinking turned violent. The survivor who'd moved back home after her divorce and rebuilt her life from scattered pieces. That woman was still in there, buried maybe, wounded certainly, but not dead. "Jennifer," I said, moving behind her chair, my hands finding her shoulders. "Look at me. Really look." She raised her eyes reluctantly, meeting mine in the silvered glass. What I saw there nearly broke my heart. A kind of hollow surrender, the look of someone who'd given up fighting because the fight had lasted too long. "This isn't love, baby." The words came out harder than I'd intended, but Jennifer needed to hear them. Love doesn't make you disappear. Love doesn't make you smaller. Love doesn't make you question your own sanity or apologize for existing. Her face crumpled like tissue paper. But I loved him. I really loved him, Mom. How could I have been so wrong about someone? How could I not see what he was? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with self-blame and wounded pride. I recognized that particular kind of shame. I'd felt it myself decades ago, when I discovered that my first fiancé before Richard had been engaged to 2 other women simultaneously. The humiliation of being fooled wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about the terrible fear that maybe you deserved it. "Because he's a professional," I said firmly. "Because he's had practice. Because choosing you as a target doesn't say anything about your intelligence or worth it, says everything about his calculation and cruelty." I turned her chair around so she faced me directly. No mirror between us. Nothing but the truth we both needed to confront. Jennifer, do you remember when you started teaching at Riverside Elementary? That first year when you had Tommy Martinez in your class? She blinked, confusion replacing some of the despair in her eyes. Tommy? The boy who was being bullied? The boy whose mother was working 3 jobs and couldn't afford the right clothes, so the other kids called him names and excluded him from games. Remember how you handled that? A flicker of something recognition, maybe even pride crossed her face. I made him my special helper, gave him responsibilities in class so the other kids would see his value, and I talked to the class about how differences make us stronger, not weaker. You protected him, I said, my voice growing stronger with certainty. You saw a vulnerable child being systematically torn down by others, and you stepped in. You used your authority, your compassion, your intelligence to change the dynamic in that classroom. Jennifer's breathing had slowed, her hands no longer trembling quite so violently. But that was different. That was my job. That was who you are. I gripped her hands, feeling how cold her fingers were despite the warmth of the bathroom. You're someone who protects vulnerable people. You're someone who stands up to bullies. You're someone who fights for what's right, even when it's difficult. I could see her struggling against years of conditioning, against Kevin's voice in her head telling her she was weak, unstable, dependent. The battle played out across her features, doubt warring with recognition, fear fighting against remembered strength. But Mom, this is so much bigger than a classroom situation. This is my marriage, my life, my... She touched her stomach with that protective gesture that was becoming automatic. My baby. Yes, I said simply. It's bigger. The stakes are higher, but you're not the same person you were when you protected Tommy Martinez. You're stronger now. You've survived more. And this time, you're not fighting alone. I reached into my purse and pulled out something I'd been carrying since Christmas Eve, the small framed photo of Jennifer from her first year teaching. In it, she stood in front of her classroom, arms crossed, wearing a confident smile and a dress covered in tiny apples. She looked capable, fierce, ready to take on the world. This is who you were before Kevin, I said, placing the photo in her hands. This is who you still are, underneath all the damage he's done. This woman. I tapped the glass covering her younger face. This woman wouldn't let a predator destroy her. She'd find a way to fight back. Jennifer stared at the photograph, her thumb tracing the edge of the frame. I remember that day. It was parent-teacher conferences, and Mrs. Henderson from the PTA was complaining that I was too demanding of the students. She wanted me to lower my standards so her son wouldn't have to work so hard. What did you tell her? A ghost of a smile flickered across Jennifer's lips. I told her that my job wasn't to make her son comfortable. It was to make him capable, and that lowering expectations was just another form of giving up on him. Exactly. I felt something ease in my chest, a knot of worry beginning to loosen. And what is Kevin trying to do to you, if not lower your expectations? If not make you give up on yourself? The parallel hit her like a physical blow. I watched understanding dawn in her eyes, not the terrible realization of betrayal we'd experienced in Diane's office, but something different. Recognition of her own power, memory of her own strength. He wants me to believe I'm incapable of handling my own life, she said slowly, like Mrs. Henderson wanted me to believe her son was incapable of meeting higher standards. And what's the result when you believe that? You stop trying. You accept less. You let other people make your decisions because you don't trust yourself anymore. I nodded, feeling like a teacher myself, not teaching facts, but teaching my daughter to remember who she was. So what do we do with bullies, Jennifer? What did you teach Tommy Martinez to do when kids tried to make him feel small? Her spine straightened almost imperceptibly. You don't let them see that they've hurt you. You document what they do. You find allies, and you use the system against them. The system, I repeated, pulling out the business card Diane Rodriguez had given us. 3 weeks, Jennifer. 3 weeks of playing the part Kevin expects while we build the case that will destroy him. Can you do that?" She was quiet for so long I thought she might refuse. Outside, I could hear the winter wind rattling my storm windows, the same wind that had frozen her on the Blackwood Mansion's porch just days ago. But here, in my warm bathroom under gentle light, surrounded by the accumulated comfort of decades of real love, she looked less like a victim and more like a woman preparing for war. "I need to practice," she said finally. "If I'm going to convince Kevin I'm still his broken little wife, I need to remember how to act like her." The request cut through me like a blade. Teaching my daughter to pretend to be weak, to practice being diminished, it went against every maternal instinct I possessed. But I understood the strategy, and more importantly, I understood that this was Jennifer taking control. "Show me," I said. She stood up, and the transformation was remarkable and heartbreaking. Her shoulders dropped, her head tilted downward, her hands came together in that familiar apologetic gesture I'd watched her perform 100 times in Kevin's presence. Even her voice changed, becoming smaller, more hesitant. "I'm sorry, Kevin. I know I upset you earlier. I didn't mean to embarrass you in front of your friends. I was just trying to contribute to the conversation, but I realized now that I was being inappropriate." The performance was perfect, which made it all the more devastating. This wasn't acting. This was muscle memory, the physical embodiment of 2 years of psychological conditioning. "Stop," I said sharply, and she straightened immediately, the mask falling away. "Good, you can do it. But Jennifer, listen to me." I gripped her shoulders, making sure she could see the steel in my eyes. "Every time you put on that performance, remember it's exactly that. Performance. Not truth. Not who you are. Just a role you're playing to survive." She nodded, but I could see the cost of what I was asking written in the tension around her eyes. "What if I get lost in it? What if I start believing it again? Then you call me. Every day. Multiple times a day if you need to. We'll have a code word, something Kevin wouldn't think twice about hearing." "What kind of code word?" I thought about it, needing something that would sound natural but carry the weight of our shared purpose. "Teaching. If you need to remember who you really are, call me and mention something about your teaching days. That'll be our signal that you're struggling, that you need me to remind you that you're strong. And if I need help immediately, if something goes wrong, then you mention the Christmas ornaments, the ones Kevin threw away. That's our emergency signal. It means you're in danger and need to get out." She nodded again, committing our codes to memory. But as we prepared to leave the bathroom, she caught my arm, her grip tight with fear. "Mom, what if I can't do it? What if he realizes I know?" And her hand moved protectively to her stomach, and I understood what she couldn't bring herself to say. What if he hurts the baby? The question hung between us like a loaded gun, acknowledging the terrible risk we were taking. Kevin had already proven himself capable of systematic psychological abuse. If he felt cornered, if he suspected Jennifer had discovered his plans, there was no telling how far he might go to protect his scheme. But as I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, past the fear and exhaustion to the core of steel that Kevin had never quite managed to break, I knew we didn't have a choice. In 3 weeks, her inheritance would mature. In 3 weeks, if we did nothing, Kevin would either have her committed or divorced, and either way, she'd lose everything, her money, her freedom, and quite possibly her child. "Then we make sure he doesn't realize," I said with more confidence than I felt. "We make sure you're so convincing, so perfectly what he expects, that he never suspects the broken bird he's been tormenting has grown claws." Jennifer's smile was small but real, the first genuine expression of hope I'd seen from her since Christmas Eve. "Claws," she repeated. "I like that." As she gathered her things to return to the mansion, to return to her performance, I felt the familiar weight of maternal fear settle in my chest. I was sending my daughter back into the den of someone who wanted to destroy her, asking her to smile and play house with a man who saw her as nothing more than a bank account with a heartbeat. but I was also watching her transform from victim to survivor to something harder and more dangerous. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something that surprised me: pride. Jennifer was going to do this. She was going to play Kevin's game better than he'd ever imagined possible. And when the time came to spring our trap, she'd be ready. The war was about to begin. The sound of my phone buzzing against my nightstand at 6:15 in the morning had become as familiar as my own heartbeat over the past 2 weeks. Jennifer's daily check-in, always timed for when Kevin was in the shower, always delivered in that carefully modulated voice that had become second nature to her, bright enough to sound normal if he overheard, but coded with messages only I could understand. "Good morning, Mom," she said, and I could hear the forced cheer straining against exhaustion. I was just thinking about my teaching days again. Remember how I used to plan my lessons so carefully? Every detail mapped out in advance? Teaching. Our signal that she was struggling to hold on to herself. I sat up in bed, my arthritic fingers already reaching for the notepad where I'd been tracking her calls, documenting everything for Diane Rodriguez. "I remember, sweetheart. You always said preparation was the key to handling difficult students." I kept my voice warm and normal while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Are you preparing for something special today?" "Kevin is taking me car shopping." The words came out in a rush, and I heard the bitter irony she couldn't quite suppress. "He says it's time I had something more reliable than my old Honda. Something befitting a Blackwood wife." The Honda. Her father had helped her buy that car 6 years ago, sitting in the dealership for 3 hours while she agonized over the monthly payments. Richard had been so proud when she'd finally signed the papers, treating us all to dinner afterward to celebrate her independence. Now Kevin wanted to replace it with something he chose, something he controlled, something that would make her even more dependent on his generosity. The symbolism was so perfect it was nauseating. How thoughtful of him, I managed, though the words tasted like ash. What kind of car is he thinking? Something expensive. He keeps talking about our new lifestyle and how I need to start acting like someone who belongs in his world. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Mom, he's already spent $40,000 on a car. For me. Money that doesn't exist yet. The inheritance." Kevin was spending Jennifer's inheritance before she'd even received it, so confident in his scheme that he was already living off the proceeds of her destruction. "Well," I said carefully, "that's quite an investment in your future together." "Yes," Jennifer said, and I heard something new in her voice, not the broken submission of the past 2 years, but the cold precision of someone keeping score. "He's very focused on our future, very detailed in his planning." Through the phone, I heard the distant sound of a shower turning off, and Jennifer's breathing quickened. I should go. He'll want his coffee exactly the way he likes it, and if it's not ready when he comes downstairs... "Take care of yourself, sweetheart," I said. "Remember what we talked about staying strong in difficult situations." "I remember, Mom." "I love you." The line went dead, leaving me alone with the pre-dawn darkness and the growing certainty that we were running out of time. 2 weeks into Jennifer's performance, and Kevin was getting bolder, more careless with his confidence. The car shopping wasn't just about control, it was about celebrating. He thought he'd already won. The next call came 3 hours later, while I was pretending to read the morning paper and actually staring at the phone, willing it to ring. "Mom, you'll never guess what happened at the dealership," Jennifer said, and this time her voice carried genuine excitement underneath the fear. "Kevin left his phone in the car when we went inside to do paperwork, the one with the blue case, you know, the burner phone, the one he used to communicate with his girlfriend. And," I prompted, my pulse quickening, "I may have accidentally picked up the wrong phone when I was looking for mine. Easy mistake to make, they look so similar." The satisfaction in her voice was barely contained. "I'll have to remember to give it back to him later." Much later. My daughter, the woman Kevin thought he'd broken, had just stolen his secret communications device. The teacher who'd protected Tommy Martinez from bullies was protecting herself now, using the same strategic thinking that had made her classroom a safe space for vulnerable children. That was careless of him, I said, very careless. Almost like he doesn't think I'm smart enough to notice details like that. Jennifer's voice hardened. He's been making a lot of assumptions about what I notice lately. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen with my lukewarm coffee, marveling at the transformation I'd witnessed over the past 2 weeks. The broken woman who'd sobbed in my bathroom had evolved into something Kevin would never expect, a strategic opponent who'd learned to weaponize his own underestimation of her. The third call of that day came just after lunch, and Jennifer's voice was different, shakier, but with an undercurrent of wild triumph that made my skin prickle with anticipation. "Mom, I need to tell you about my morning. I was cleaning Kevin's study while he was at work. He likes everything perfect, and his phone kept ringing. The blue one. I thought maybe it was important business, so I answered." I gripped the phone tighter. "Oh?" A woman's voice, very familiar. She said, "Baby, are you still coming to my apartment tonight? I got that champagne you like, the expensive stuff. We should celebrate early only 6 more days until the birthday girl gets her surprise." Jennifer's voice was steady, professional, but I could hear the steel underneath. I told her she had the wrong number, of course. But she seemed very confused, kept insisting she was calling Kevin Blackwood, the girlfriend. Kevin's assistant, the one whose text messages we'd seen detailing their entire conspiracy, and she'd just confirmed their relationship on a recording device that would hold up in court. "How strange," I said. "What did you do?" I was very polite. I explained that this was Mrs. Kevin Blackwood, and perhaps she'd gotten confused about which number to call. There was a long pause, and then she hung up very quickly. I could picture it Jennifer, playing the perfect innocent wife, letting Allison Morgan dig her own grave with every word. The teacher who'd learned to handle difficult parents with deadly politeness had just maneuvered Kevin's girlfriend into a confession. "You handled that very well, sweetheart." I thought so, although I should probably mention it to Kevin when he gets home. Wouldn't want him to miss any important business calls. The trap was closing. Every day, Jennifer gathered more evidence, more ammunition for the war we were preparing to wage. But the psychological cost was becoming harder to hide, even in her carefully coded phone calls. That evening, she called again, and for the first time in 2 weeks, her voice cracked. "He's planning something big for my birthday, Mom." "A surprise party. He keeps making mysterious phone calls and telling me not to worry my pretty little head about the details." She took a shaky breath. "He wants to invite everyone, his family, his colleagues, our neighbors. He says it's going to be a celebration I'll never forget." The words hung between us like a death sentence. We both understood what this meant. Kevin wasn't just planning a party. He was planning a public humiliation, a grand finale to his psychological warfare. Probably with Dr. Reynolds in attendance to document Jennifer's breakdown in front of witnesses, creating the final piece of evidence he'd need to have her declared mentally unfit. "Jennifer," I said carefully, "do you remember what we talked about? About difficult students who try to make a scene in front of the whole class?" "Yes." Her voice was small, but I heard the steel underneath. "You don't give them the reaction they want. You stay calm, you document everything, and you use their own behavior against them." "Exactly. And if a student tried to humiliate you in front of parents and colleagues, you'd be prepared. You'd have everything documented, all your evidence ready, so when they made their move, you could show everyone exactly what kind of person they really were." "So, what do we do about surprise parties, sweetheart?" For the first time in days, Jennifer laughed. Not the bright, false cheer she performed for Kevin, but the genuine sound of a woman who just realized she held all the cards. "We make sure the surprise isn't what they expect." As I hung up the phone that night, I thought about birthdays, real ones, not the theatrical performances Kevin was planning. I remembered Jennifer's 6th birthday, when she'd insisted we invite the new girl from her class, the one who didn't speak English well and had no friends. Jennifer had spent her own party money on a second cake so the girl wouldn't feel left out, creating 2 celebrations instead of 1, because she couldn't bear the thought of anyone feeling excluded on a day that was supposed to be special. That was the real Jennifer. Not the broken woman Kevin thought he'd created, but the fighter who'd always stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. In 6 days, Kevin would throw his party, expecting to celebrate Jennifer's final destruction in front of an audience of witnesses. He'd invite his family, his colleagues, everyone he wanted to impress with his cleverness and control. But he'd forgotten one crucial thing about teachers. We don't just protect our students from bullies, we teach them how to fight back. And sometimes, when the lesson is important enough, we make sure the whole class is watching when justice gets served. The phone beside my bed stayed silent for the rest of the night, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat by my window, watching the street where Jennifer and I had taken so many walks when she was small, planning the birthday surprise that Kevin would never see coming. 6 days. In 6 days, the predator who thought he'd destroyed my daughter would discover that he'd actually created something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The surprise party was going to be everything Kevin promised, a celebration Jennifer would never forget. He just wouldn't be celebrating what he thought. The champagne flutes caught the light from the crystal chandelier in the Blackwood Mansion's great room, casting tiny rainbows across the faces of people who'd come to witness what they thought would be Jennifer's final humiliation. 60 guests in designer clothes, sipping expensive wine and making polite conversation while waiting for the entertainment to begin. Kevin had outdone himself with the guest list. His entire family, colleagues from his law firm, neighbors from their exclusive Westchester development, even Dr. Reynolds lurking near the fireplace with his notebook barely concealed in his jacket pocket. They'd all come to watch the show, expecting to see a mentally unstable woman have a very public breakdown on her 35th birthday. They had no idea they were about to witness something far more spectacular. Jennifer stood beside the elaborate cake 3 tiers of pristine white frosting, decorated with delicate sugar flowers that had probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. Wearing the pale yellow dress Kevin had chosen for her, she looked perfect, fragile, exactly the way he wanted her to appear, beautiful, vulnerable, and completely under his control. But I could see what the others couldn't. The way she held her shoulders just slightly straighter than she had in months. The way her hands weren't trembling despite being the center of attention. The way her eyes found mine across the crowded room and held steady, full of quiet determination that made my chest swell with pride. My daughter was ready. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kevin called out, tapping his champagne flute with a silver knife to get everyone's attention. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward the birthday girl who was supposed to provide their evening's entertainment. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate my beautiful wife's 35th birthday. This is such a special day for Jennifer and for our entire family." The way he emphasized special made my skin crawl. Patricia Blackwood stood beside him, wearing her perfect smile and her grandmother's pearls, radiating the kind of cold satisfaction that came from watching a plan fall into place. William raised his glass in a mock toast, his eyes already calculating how quickly they could move to the legal proceedings once Jennifer inevitably broke down. They thought they were watching a lamb being led to slaughter. They had no idea they were looking at a wolf in sheep's clothing. "Jennifer," Kevin continued, his voice taking on that particular tone of condescending affection that had made her shrink for 2 years. "Would you like to say something to our guests? I know how much you've been looking forward to this moment." The room held its breath. This was it. The moment when Jennifer was supposed to crack under the pressure, provide the final evidence they needed to paint her as unstable and unfit. Dr. Reynolds actually pulled out his phone, probably planning to record her breakdown for his files. Jennifer stepped forward, and for just a moment I saw a flicker of the woman she'd been before Kevin, confident, strong, unafraid to take up space in the world. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the room, steady and sure. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her smile so perfect it could have been painted on. This really is a special day for me. A day of truth, a day when everything becomes clear. Something in her tone made Kevin's confident expression waver slightly. He'd been expecting tears, stammering, the kind of emotional collapse that would justify everything that came next. This wasn't in the script he'd written. "You see," Jennifer continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "birthdays are about more than just celebrating another year of life. They're about reflection, about understanding who you really are and what you've learned." She reached into the small purse she'd been clutching, the one Kevin had bought for her, because he claimed her old purse was too shabby for their social circle, and pulled out a manila folder. The same folder that had held the evidence of his conspiracy, now thick with 3 weeks of additional documentation. "And what I've learned," she said, opening the folder with deliberate care, "is that some people aren't who they pretend to be." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kevin took a step toward her, his public mask slipping just enough to show the predator underneath. "Jennifer, sweetheart, what are you—" "I'm sharing some documents with our guests," she said calmly, pulling out photocopies and beginning to distribute them to the nearest attendees. "Information I think they'll find very interesting, starting with these surveillance reports detailing my daily activities for the past 8 months. The papers passed from hand to hand like wildfire, and I watched the faces around the room change as people began to understand what they were reading. Gasps echoed through the great room. Someone dropped their champagne flute, the crystal shattering against the marble floor with a sound like breaking ice. "Jennifer, stop!" Kevin's voice had lost all pretense of loving concern, becoming sharp and commanding. "You're making a scene. You're embarrassing yourself in front of our friends." "Am I?" Jennifer's voice was conversational, almost pleasant. "Or am I finally telling the truth after 2 years of lies?" She pulled out more documents, the recorded transcripts, the edited conversations, the text messages between Kevin and his assistant, planning her destruction. With each revelation, the room grew quieter. The only sounds the rustling of paper and Patricia's increasingly frantic whispers to her husband. "This one's particularly interesting," Jennifer said, holding up a printout of Allison Morgan's bank records, which Diane Rodriguez had somehow obtained through legal channels I didn't want to think too hard about. A paper trail showing regular deposits from Kevin's personal account to his assistant's savings account. Payments that coincidentally started right around the time our relationship began. Dr. Reynolds had gone pale, his phone forgotten in his shaking hands. Several of Kevin's law firm colleagues were already backing toward the exits, clearly wanting no part of what was about to unfold. "Jennifer." Patricia stepped forward, her voice taking on that particular tone wealthy people used when trying to manage damage to their reputation. "I think you need to calm down, dear. Perhaps we should call Dr. Reynolds to help you." "Oh, you mean Dr. Reynolds?" Jennifer turned toward the therapist with a smile that was pure steel wrapped in silk. "The one who's been sharing my confidential therapy sessions with my husband in violation of every ethical standard in his profession?" "That Dr. Reynolds?" The therapist bolted for the door, pushing past startled guests in his haste to escape. But it was too late. Everyone had heard. Everyone understood. The conspiracy wasn't just between Kevin and his family. It involved professionals, people who were supposed to protect vulnerable clients, not participate in their destruction. "Kevin," William hissed, his face flushed with fury, "shut her up, now!" But Kevin was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. The broken, apologetic woman he'd spent 2 years creating had vanished, replaced by someone who stood tall and spoke clearly and wasn't afraid of his anger anymore. "I can't," he said, and for the first time since I'd known him, his voice shook. "I don't know what happened to her. She wasn't supposed to be able to. She can't be doing this." "Can't be doing what?" Jennifer asked with mock innocence. "Standing up for myself? Protecting my unborn child from a father who sees it as nothing more than leverage in a custody battle? Fighting back against people who tried to steal everything my father left me?" The word pregnant rippled through the room like a shockwave. Several people gasped audibly. Patricia's face went white as paper, and I saw her understand immediately that this changed everything. If Jennifer could prove Kevin's conspiracy, he wouldn't just lose the inheritance money. He'd lose access to his own child. Jennifer. Patricia's voice was desperate now, all pretense of superiority gone. Please, think about what you're doing. Think about the family. Think about the children. I am thinking about the children, Jennifer replied, her hand moving protectively to her still flat stomach. I'm thinking about protecting my child from growing up believing that love looks like control, that marriage means making yourself small enough to fit someone else's ego, that family means destroying each other for money. That's when I saw him. Detective Mike Rodriguez Diane's brother-in-law standing quietly by the front door with two uniformed officers, warrant papers in his hands. They'd been waiting for Jennifer's signal, positioned to move the moment she gave them the evidence they needed for the arrest. Jennifer caught my eye across the room and nodded slightly. It was time. Kevin Blackwood? Detective Rodriguez's voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, financial elder abuse, and violation of wiretapping statutes. The room erupted into chaos. Kevin spun toward the police, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and finally, the cold calculation of a cornered predator looking for an escape route. This is ridiculous, he snarled, his public mask finally discarded completely. You can't prove anything. It's her word against mine, and everyone here knows she's been unstable for months. Ask Dr. Reynolds. Oh, wait, he's already run away like the coward he is. Actually, Detective Rodriguez said calmly, pulling out his own folder of documents, we can prove quite a bit. Thanks to your wife's excellent documentation over the past 3 weeks, we have recorded conversations, financial records, correspondence with private investigators, and testimony from several of your previous victims who've agreed to cooperate with our investigation. Kevin's face went gray as old newspaper. Previous victims? Stephanie Morrison sends her regards. So does Amanda Scott and Rachel Torres. Turns out, when women compare notes about your family's methods, patterns start to emerge. I watched Patricia's perfect composure finally crack, her face crumbling as she realized their entire world was about to come crashing down. Please, she whispered, grabbing Jennifer's arm with desperate fingers. Please, we can work this out. We can make this right. Think about our reputation, about what this will do to the family name dash. Jennifer looked down at the manicured hand gripping her arm, the same hand that had served everyone apple pie except her, that had dismissed her pain as weakness, that had planned her destruction with such casual cruelty. I am thinking about family, Jennifer said quietly, gently removing Patricia's grip. I'm thinking about the family I'm going to build with my child. A family based on love instead of manipulation. A family where people don't disappear to make others more comfortable. As the handcuffs clicked around Kevin's wrists, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 years. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Not satisfaction at revenge, but relief that it was finally over. My daughter was safe. My grandchild was safe. The predators who'd tried to destroy everything we held dear were finally facing consequences for their actions. But even as Kevin was led away shouting threats about appeals and expensive lawyers, Detective Rodriguez approached Jennifer with another piece of information that sent fresh shockwaves through the remaining guests. Mrs. Blackwood, you should know we just received word from airport security. Allison Morgan was apprehended at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport about 20 minutes ago. She was attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with 2 suitcases full of jewelry, bearer bonds, and financial documents. Looks like she was planning to disappear with quite a bit more than just your husband. The final domino fell. Kevin's assistant, his co-conspirator, his girlfriend, caught red-handed trying to flee with what were undoubtedly stolen assets from multiple victims. The conspiracy wasn't just about Jennifer's inheritance. It was bigger, more systematic, more criminal than any of us had imagined. As the police finished processing the scene and the last of the shocked guests finally left, I found myself alone with Jennifer in the great room where it had all begun. The elaborate birthday cake sat untouched on its crystal pedestal, those perfect sugar flowers mocking the celebration that was supposed to have been Jennifer's destruction. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, and for the first time in 2 years, I saw my daughter's real smile. "It really is," she replied, her hand moving to her stomach where my grandchild was growing safe and free. "It really, truly is." The newspaper landed on my front porch with a soft thud on a crisp October morning, 6 months after Kevin's arrest. The headline was buried on page 3 of the business section, but I'd been watching for it. Former attorney Kevin Blackwood sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for fraud conspiracy. 8 years. I folded the paper carefully, setting it beside my coffee cup on the same kitchen table where I'd first pieced together the inheritance timeline. The autumn sunlight streaming through my windows felt warmer somehow, as if the world itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Jennifer lived 3 blocks away now in a modest craftsman house with a front porch swing and a garden where she was learning to grow tomatoes. She'd insisted on staying close after everything that had happened, not out of fear, but out of choice. The difference was everything. 8 years, she said when I called her with the news, and I could hear the quiet satisfaction in her voice. "Do you think it's enough?" "I think," I replied, watching a cardinal build its nest in the oak tree Richard had planted 20 years ago. "It's justice, and sometimes justice looks different than we expect." The trial had been a spectacle that made the society pages for weeks. Kevin's defense team, the best money could buy, funded by liquidating the Blackwood family assets, had tried everything. They'd painted Jennifer as vindictive, claimed her evidence was fabricated, even attempted to argue that Kevin was the real victim of a calculating woman who'd trapped him into marriage. None of it worked. Stephanie Morrison had testified via video link from Oregon, describing in devastating detail how Kevin had used identical tactics on her 5 years earlier. Amanda Scott had flown in from California, carrying bank records showing the systematic theft of her inheritance. Rachel Torres, speaking publicly for the first time since her breakdown, had revealed how the family had drugged her food to make her appear unstable during custody proceedings. 7 women. 7 separate cases of systematic predation, all following the same playbook. The federal prosecutor had called it one of the most sophisticated financial abuse conspiracies his office had ever prosecuted. Dr. Reynolds had lost his license and faced his own criminal charges. Allison Morgan had received 4 years for her role in the conspiracy, though she'd cooperated extensively with prosecutors in exchange for a lighter sentence. The private investigation firm had been shut down, their files revealing dozens of other suspicious surveillance cases that were still under investigation. But it was Patricia's fall that had surprised me most. The woman who'd once served apple pie to everyone but my daughter, who dismissed Jennifer's handmade Christmas ornaments as too rustic, had broken completely during her deposition. When federal agents had seized the mansion to pay victim restitution, she'd been found in the master bedroom, crying over photo albums and trying to burn financial documents in the marble fireplace. The family was living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Akron now. William's law practice had collapsed when clients learned about his role in the conspiracy. The country club memberships were gone, the luxury cars repossessed, the carefully cultivated reputation in ruins. Sometimes justice looked like prison sentences and asset seizures. Sometimes it looked like proud people learning to shop at discount grocery stores and discovering that crystal chandeliers couldn't buy back lost dignity. "Mom, can you come over?" Jennifer's voice carried a new quality these days, not the careful fear I'd grown accustomed to, but the easy confidence of someone who'd remembered how to take up space in the world. "I want to show you something." I found her in the sunny front room of her house, surrounded by papers and file folders. But these weren't the desperate evidence compilations of 6 months ago. These were business plans, legal documents, incorporation papers. Her laptop screen showed a website design with a logo that made my throat tighten with pride. Phoenix Rising, supporting women through financial abuse recovery. I got the final approval from the state this morning, she said, her hand resting on her growing belly, 7 months along now, healthy and strong. We're officially a nonprofit organization. She'd used her inheritance, the $400,000 that Kevin had tried so hard to steal, to fund something beautiful. A program that provided legal aid, temporary housing, financial counseling, and emotional support for women escaping predatory relationships. Everything she wished had existed when she was trapped in her own nightmare. Diane Rodriguez is going to be our legal director, Jennifer continued, her excitement building as she explained the program structure. And we've got 3 therapists signing on, real ones, who understand that healing means empowerment, not medication, plus social workers, financial advisors, even a technology specialist to help women protect their digital privacy. I picked up one of the brochures she'd designed, seeing her father's practical wisdom in every carefully chosen word. Phoenix Rising wasn't just about escaping abuse, it was about transforming the experience into strength, turning survival into advocacy. There's something else, she said, pulling out another folder. Remember Stephanie Morrison? Kevin's first wife? She wants to be our first volunteer coordinator. She's been helping other women informally for years, and now she wants to make it official. The circle was completing itself. Stephanie, who'd lost her children and her inheritance to Kevin's cruelty, was going to help other women avoid the same fate. Amanda, who'd been financially destroyed, was consulting on our financial literacy program. Rachel, who'd been gaslit into a psychiatric hold, was training our therapists on the warning signs of psychological manipulation. Kevin had created a network of victims. Jennifer was transforming them into a network of survivors, healers, warriors. The baby kicked then, a strong flutter against Jennifer's palm that made us both smile. We'd found out last week that it was a girl, a granddaughter who would grow up knowing that women in our family don't disappear to make others comfortable. She'd learn early that love doesn't require making yourself smaller, that real strength sometimes looks like vulnerability, that the best revenge against people who try to break you is becoming unbreakable. What are you going to name her? I asked, settling into the rocking chair Jennifer had bought at an estate sale. Not because she couldn't afford new furniture, but because she liked the idea of giving beautiful old things new life. Elizabeth, Jennifer said without hesitation, after great-grandmother, the one who left Grandpa and started her own dress shop when divorce was still scandalous. She was a survivor, too. Elizabeth, the great-grandmother I'd told Jennifer stories about when she was small, the woman who'd built a business with her own hands when society told her a divorced woman should disappear quietly. The family stories that had seemed like ancient history were suddenly present, vital, part of an unbroken chain of women who refused to be erased. She would have been proud, I said, and meant it. The front doorbell rang then, and Jennifer's face lit up with anticipation. That'll be Katie and the book club girls. They're coming to help me stuff envelopes for our first fundraising mailing. I watched through the window as women filed up Jennifer's front walk, her old book club friends, who'd been slowly finding their way back into her life as she healed. Katie, carrying her newborn in a carrier, Susan with homemade cookies, Marie with a bottle of sparkling cider for toasting. The community Kevin had tried so hard to steal from her, returning naturally as she rebuilt herself. This was what real love looked like, not the possessive control Kevin had disguised as devotion, but the patient, generous, freeing love of people who wanted you to be more yourself, not less. People who celebrated your strength instead of demanding your weakness. As I prepared to leave, letting Jennifer enjoy her friends and her planning and her beautiful, purposeful future, she caught my hand. "Mom, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice soft with emotion. "I know I said it at the trial, but I need to say it again. Thank you for not giving up on me when I'd given up on myself, for seeing me when I'd disappeared, for fighting for me when I didn't know how to fight anymore." I squeezed her hand, feeling the strength in her fingers. No more trembling, no more hesitation. "Sweetheart, You fought the hardest battle of all. You survived. You came back to yourself. You turned your pain into purpose. I just held the door open while you found your way home. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and the newspaper article about Kevin's sentencing. 8 years in federal prison, loss of his law license, financial ruin, social exile, the complete destruction of everything he'd valued: money, status, reputation, control. But as I read the details of his downfall, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't feel satisfied by his suffering. I didn't feel vindicated by his punishment. I felt empty of anger, clean of rage, free of the poison that had been eating at my heart for 2 years. Justice hadn't been about destroying Kevin. It had been about freeing Jennifer. I folded the newspaper and put it in the recycling bin. Tomorrow, Jennifer would give birth to a daughter who would never know what it felt like to make herself small for someone else's comfort. Next week, Phoenix Rising would help its first client escape a predatory marriage. Next month, Stephanie Morrison would train new volunteers using the hard-won wisdom of her survival. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Jennifer's voice was breathless with excitement and just a touch of panic. "Mom? I think it's time. Elizabeth's decided she's ready to meet the world." I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, my heart full of the particular joy that comes at the end of long stories, not the relief of surviving, but the celebration of thriving. Outside, the October stars were just becoming visible in the darkening sky, the same stars that had watched over Richard when he'd set up that insurance policy all those years ago, hoping to provide for his daughter's future. He'd succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. The money he'd left hadn't just secured Jennifer's financial independence, it had funded her transformation from victim to advocate, from survivor to savior of other women who'd found themselves trapped in similar nightmares. As I drove toward the hospital where my granddaughter was about to be born, I thought about the story I'd someday tell little Elizabeth about her mother's courage, about the family of strong women she'd been born into, about the grandfather she'd never meet, but whose love had made her freedom possible. It would be a story about justice served and lives rebuilt, about the difference between love that controls and love that liberates, about mothers who teach their daughters that they don't have to be perfect, but they do have to be themselves. But most of all, it would be a story about how sometimes the best revenge against people who try to make you disappear is simply refusing to vanish. How the greatest victory over those who want to steal your future is building something beautiful with the pieces they tried to break. Somewhere across town, Kevin was beginning his first night of an 8-year sentence, learning what it felt like to have his freedom controlled by others. And here I was, racing toward a hospital where new life was about to begin, where my daughter was about to become